When a teenage filmmaker vanishes while documenting Appalachian folklore, his only trace is a tripod found standing deep in the woods 3 years later now. As his mother unravels the mystery he left behind, she discovers his story was never just about disappearance, but about being truly seen. Noah Whitaker vanished on a warm April afternoon, the kind where the sky stretches cloudless above the mountains and the trees hum with spring. He had packed light just enough for a 2-night solo trip into the Pisgah National Forest. It was all for his senior documentary project, something he had poured months into planning. His topic was ambitious, a deep dive into Appalachian folklore and unexplained disappearances tied to the region's shadowy history. It wasn't just another school assignment, it was the film he believed would launch his future. He left a note on the kitchen counter for his mother, Jennifer, scribbled in his familiar rushed handwriting. "Heading out to Spine Ridge. Should be back Sunday night. Love you." It wasn't unusual for Noah to venture out on his own. He'd grown up hiking these woods, always with a camera slung over his shoulder and a story on his mind. Jennifer had trusted him. Until that trust turned into 3 years of silence. The first night passed without alarm. When he didn't return the next evening, Jennifer figured he'd stayed out an extra day to finish his shoot. But by Monday morning, her worry bloomed into dread. His phone went straight to voicemail. His GPS tracker had gone offline. By that evening, Jennifer was pacing in front of the ranger station, trembling fingers clutching a printed photo of her only son. The search lasted 12 days. Search dogs, helicopters, volunteer groups, thermal drones. They combed the trails, followed every lead, questioned hikers and campers. Not a single footprint. Not a torn piece of fabric. It was as if the forest had swallowed him whole. Noah's gear was never found. Not his tent, not his drone, not even the tripod he never left behind. The only clue remained on his laptop back home: a few minutes of silent, incomplete footage, a wide-angle shot of trees swaying beneath a pale sky. The timestamp stopped at 4:38 p.m. on the day he disappeared. In the years that followed, Jennifer kept his room exactly as he left it. His books, his posters, the half-packed duffel bag by the closet. She never gave up hope, though the world around her had moved on. Then, one crisp October morning, a drone hobbyist uploaded footage to a local forum footage that showed a camera tripod standing upright deep in the forest, untouched by time. Jennifer sat at her kitchen table, fingers wrapped tightly around a cold coffee mug, the screen of her phone still lit with the paused video. The drone footage played in her mind on repeat, sharper than any memory, more vivid than her own reflection. The clip was only 17 seconds long. The drone crested a ridge, hovered briefly, then dipped low over a quiet stretch of forest, and there it was, a tripod. Standing upright among the moss and leaf litter, perfectly still, just as Noah would have left it. She didn't remember standing, only that she was suddenly dialing a number she hadn't called in nearly 2 years. Detective Reed Hensley answered on the second ring, his voice groggy but alert. She didn't need to explain much. By the time she sent him the video link, he was already asking how fast she could get to the ranger station. That afternoon, Jennifer found herself back in the same parking lot where she had stood 3 years earlier, clinging to hope that her son had simply wandered off and gotten lost. But now, something had shifted. This wasn't another false lead or a well-meaning tip from a local conspiracy theorist. This was concrete, real. The tripod had a name engraved on the base. Noah had scratched it in himself with a key. She would know it anywhere. They hiked in before dusk, led by a Forest Service guide and flanked by 2 detectives. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of wet bark and pine. As they moved deeper into the woods, the silence grew dense, like the trees were listening. Jennifer's boots sank slightly into the damp earth with each step, her heart thudding louder than the wind overhead. Then the guide raised a hand. They stopped, just short of a small clearing, ringed with pale stones and deadfall. There it stood, the tripod. Exactly as it had appeared in the video, legs splayed wide and grounded, camera mount still fixed in place, though empty now. Jennifer stepped forward, knees weak, and touched it with trembling fingers. It was real. It had been here all this time, waiting. She turned slowly, eyes scanning the shadows, and whispered his name. Noah. The clearing felt untouched, as if the wind itself had hesitated to cross its boundary. Jennifer knelt beside the tripod, brushing away fallen leaves and damp pine needles from its base. There, just as she remembered, was the faint engraving scratched into the aluminum, N. Whitaker. Her breath caught. For a moment, it was as though Noah had just stepped away, camera in hand, promising to be right back. Detective Hensley stood behind her, silent, letting her take the moment. The forest had grown thick around the site, branches knotted like fingers trying to conceal something. Nearby, one of the search techs began sweeping the area with a metal detector, while another snapped photographs from different angles. Jennifer didn't move. Her fingers traced the edge of the tripod, part of her still waiting to hear his voice calling from behind a tree. A few feet away, nestled against a decaying log, something caught the light. One of the deputies called out softly and knelt. In the crumbling leaves lay a DSLR camera, its body water-damaged and caked in mud, but still intact. Carefully, they slipped it into a forensic evidence bag. The deputy passed it to Hensley, who examined it with cautious reverence. It was Noah's. The same model he'd saved for with 2 summers of lawn care and editing work. Jennifer stared at it through the plastic, her eyes swimming with tears. She could almost see the faded sticker he'd put on the side, the one that read, "frame by frame," a phrase he used often, as if it explained the whole world. Hensley crouched beside her. "We'll get everything off that card," he said gently. "Anything it recorded. We'll know what he saw." Jennifer nodded, her voice stuck in her throat. The woods pressed in close around them. Birdsong had stopped. Even the rustle of wind seemed to hold its breath. She stood slowly and looked around. The trees felt taller now, darker somehow. In the distance, something cracked a branch underfoot maybe, or not. They gathered what they could and began the quiet walk back to the trailhead. Jennifer looked over her shoulder one last time. The tripod still stood in the center of the clearing, alone beneath the trees, as though it had been waiting for them to come finish what Noah had started. 2 days later, the footage came to life. Jennifer sat beside Detective Hensley in a small, windowless room at the county forensics lab, eyes fixed on a monitor as a technician carefully played back what had been recovered from the camera's memory card. The screen flickered and shook, the image warping slightly from water damage, but the sound was there. Wind, breathing, leaves crunching under cautious steps. Then Noah's voice. It came through, quietly, tentative, as though he was talking more to himself than the camera. Still no sign of anyone. About 2 miles from the last marked trail, I found the stone pillars Mrs. Langley talked about. Weird. How symmetrical they are. Doesn't feel like a random formation. Jennifer leaned forward, her knuckles white against the edge of the table. The video jumped as Noah panned around a dense grove. Moss-covered trees stood like statues. The light was gray and washed out, as though dusk had come too early. A sound followed, not his footsteps, not the wind. A knock, then 2 more, rhythmic, deliberate. Noah's breathing changed. "I'm not alone out here," he whispered. The lens zoomed in on a ridge between 2 trees where something moved just out of frame. "I keep thinking I see someone, but every time I turn the camera they're gone." His voice cracked. "I don't like this." The technician paused the footage to fast forward. When it resumed, the angle had changed. The camera was now on the tripod, left running. Noah stepped into the frame, shoulders hunched, his eyes scanning the tree line. "If anything happens to me," he said, "this is proof I didn't just get lost. Something's wrong here. Something watches, follows." Another knock. Closer this time. The final seconds of the video showed Noah turning sharply, lips parted, eyes wide. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words were never heard. The frame jittered, blurring his image, then static. Then black. Jennifer sat in silence, unable to breathe, as the technician pulled the headset from the console. Hensley didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The forest hadn't just taken Noah. It had surrounded him, listened to him, let him record just enough before closing back in. And somehow, even 3 years later, it had allowed the truth to return. Just enough to haunt. Just enough to warn. Jennifer didn't sleep that night. She sat curled in Noah's desk chair, surrounded by shelves still holding his camera batteries, old notebooks, and half-full memory cards he'd labeled with masking tape and a Sharpie. She had returned home from the forensics lab, carrying a flash drive with the recovered footage. She couldn't bring herself to watch it again, not yet. Once was enough to imprint every shadow, every sound, every panicked breath into her bones. On the corner of his desk sat the storyboard he'd been sketching for the documentary. Torn scraps of paper pinned with thumbtacks, arrows drawn between themes. Folklore or fact, read one heading. Another said, "What's hiding in the trees?" His notes were frantic in some places, obsessed even. Jennifer traced her fingers over one scribbled phrase, written 3 times in ink that had bled through the page. They always come back different. The phrase had meant nothing to her before, just another local myth. But now she wondered what he had really seen. What had stared at him from behind the trees, knocking in patterns only it understood. She didn't believe in the supernatural, not really, but something deep in her chest told her the forest was older than any of them truly grasped, and that it remembered. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Detective Hensley stood on the porch, holding a padded evidence bag and a folder. "We got the GoPro files back," he said. "There's more. You don't have to watch them now. I can hold on to it." She took the bag from him anyway. Hensley hesitated. "There's also something else. When we examined the area around the tripod more thoroughly, we found a tree with carvings in the bark. Initials, NW. Underneath that, a date. 2 weeks after he disappeared." Jennifer stared at him. "He was alive that long?" "We don't know for sure," Hensley admitted. "But someone was trying to leave a mark. Maybe a message. Maybe just proof they were still fighting." That night, she finally played the recovered GoPro footage. It opened with Noah walking through the mist, whispering to the lens. "If someone finds this, don't follow me, don't come looking, the woods remember you." Then he turned the camera around, and for a split second, something moved behind him, something impossibly tall. Then nothing, only silence. The forest was quiet when they returned. It had been nearly a month since the discovery, and still there were no answers. Only footage, only fragments. But Jennifer had asked to see it again. Not the videos, but the place. She needed to stand where Noah had once stood, needed to understand, even if she never would. Detective Hensley walked beside her, slow and careful over the uneven ground. The clearing looked the same as before. The tripod had been removed, tagged, logged, boxed in evidence. But the hollow, where its legs had pressed into the earth, still remained, a soft triangle in the soil, ghosts of weight and time. Jennifer stepped into the imprint, letting the breeze lift strands of her hair as she turned in place. It was smaller than she expected, tighter. The trees seemed to press in from all sides, their branches creaking gently overhead like breath held in a cathedral. She held out her hand and closed her eyes. In her mind, she pictured him there, adjusting the lens, checking the light, waiting for something that had watched him longer than he ever knew. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a laminated photo, one of the last she had taken of him. Noah, smiling crookedly behind the wheel of her old car, his camera in his lap. She knelt by the tripod's imprint and laid it down gently, weighing the corners with small stones. Then she added his silver ring, the one he always wore on a chain. A marker. Something left behind. "I'm sorry I wasn't there," she whispered, her voice swallowed instantly by the trees. "But you were brave, and I will never let you be forgotten." Behind her, Hensley stood still, watching. They didn't stay long. The sky was already softening toward dusk, and the path out would get dark fast. Jennifer took one last look over her shoulder before following him back toward the trail. As they disappeared into the woods, the clearing held its silence. Far above, tangled in the branches of a long-dead pine, a single scrap of fabric fluttered once in the breeze before going still. Faded, torn, the corner of a flannel sleeve, red and black plaid. Just like the shirt Noah wore the day he vanished. Jennifer didn't talk much in the days that followed. She went through the motions, answered the calls from the sheriff's office, signed forms from the State Park Service, even sat through an interview with a local reporter who had followed Noah's case from the beginning. But inside, she was somewhere else, still in the woods. Still listening to that final whisper on the video, the warning that echoed long after the screen went black. Noah's room remained untouched, as if any shift in its order might disturb the fragile thread still connecting her to him. The blinds stayed open now, though. She wanted the sunlight to reach in, to cut through the stillness. On his desk, she placed the photo she had left in the forest, now slightly curled at the edges from dew. Beside it sat the ring. He'd worn it every day since his 15th birthday, a gift from his grandfather. She'd found it more than once tangled in his bedsheets or left on the bathroom sink. Now it stayed right there, next to the picture, catching the light like it was waiting for him to come back and claim it. The footage had reached national attention by then. News stations picked it up. True crime podcasts dissected it frame by frame. Internet sleuths argued over whether what appeared behind Noah was real or a trick of light. Some said it was pareidolia, the brain filling in gaps where only trees stood. Others were certain it was proof of something else, something older, something not meant to be seen. Jennifer didn't care what they believed. All that mattered to her was the way Noah had kept filming, even as fear overtook him. The way he whispered his warning, not just for himself, but for whoever came next. That small act of courage, captured in flickering pixels, was the only piece of him she could hold. A week after returning from the forest, she sat down with Noah's old film teacher. Together, they began assembling what would become his final project. Not the film he planned, but the one he left behind. Jennifer worked late into the night, her voice steady as she recorded the narration he never got to finish. Frame by frame, she would help him tell the story. Even if the ending was one she never wanted, the auditorium was quiet except for the low hum of the projector. It cast a soft flicker across the crowd, washing the room in shifting shades of blue and gray. Jennifer sat in the front row, hands folded tightly in her lap, as the opening frame of Noah's documentary filled the screen. It was a cold March evening, nearly 3 years to the day since he vanished. The school had offered the space after hearing about the recovered footage. The event wasn't publicized, just quietly shared among family, friends, and the few who had helped in the search. Still, every seat was filled. On screen, Noah's voice drifted in. "I used to think stories were just entertainment, something you told around a fire. But in every story, there's a reason someone started telling it in the first place." The film wove together his original interviews, journal entries, and clips recovered from the forest. Jennifer and Mr. Latham, his teacher, had filled in the gaps as best they could. Her narration came in softly where his voice had been lost, guiding the viewer from legend to reality, from mystery to tragedy. The footage from the GoPro played without edits. No music, no filters. Just Noah, walking through the mist, his voice trembling, his breath visible in the cold. "If someone finds this, don't follow me, don't come looking." Gasps rose from the audience as the figure in the background moved again, slow and deliberate, just behind Noah's shoulder, and then the screen went dark. Silence followed. Jennifer kept her eyes on the screen, even after the credits began to roll in white text against black. Names of those who helped. A dedication to missing persons. A closing title that simply read, "For Noah." The story you tried to tell, finally told. As the lights came up, no one clapped. No one spoke right away. It was the kind of silence that held reverence, grief, understanding. Jennifer stood slowly, her knees unsteady, and turned toward the small crowd. She didn't need to say anything. Her face said enough. That night, she drove home alone. The forest was still out there, just beyond the horizon, ancient and unknowable. But Noah wasn't lost anymore. His voice was out in the world. His story had been heard. The next morning, Jennifer woke before the sun. The house was quiet, the kind of stillness that only comes after a storm has passed. She moved through the hallway slowly, barefoot, as if afraid to disturb something sacred. Noah's door remained open now, not in mourning, but in acceptance. The pain hadn't faded, but it had changed shape, less like a wound, more like a scar. She stood by his window, watching the first light creep across the yard. In the soft blue dawn, the world looked almost peaceful. Birds stirred. The wind nudged the trees gently, not unlike the motion of a hand brushing hair from a child's forehead. For a moment, it almost felt like he was still here, just asleep in the next room, dreaming up his next story. The flash drive from the film sat on the kitchen table, beside a cup of tea gone cold. A note had come with it from Mr. Semperate. Latham. Your son was a storyteller, but more than that, he wanted the truth to matter. You helped make that happen. Jennifer had cried reading those words, not because of their sadness, but because of their clarity. They had seen Noah for who he truly was. She spent the morning packing a small bag. No destination in mind, just the need to leave the house, to step outside the tight orbit of grief. She drove without music, windows cracked open, the cool air filling the space around her. Eventually, she found herself turning off the main road, steering down the gravel path that led to the edge of the forest. She parked and walked to the start of the trail, stopping just before the first bend where the trees grew thick. There, she knelt and placed a small plaque into the soil. It was simple, brushed bronze, with only a few words etched into it. Noah Whitaker. Liang Tianling Sen da Liang Tianling Arsher. He saw the world through a lens and still believed in what was real. She stayed for a while, sitting on the grass, listening. The woods didn't feel hostile anymore. They felt watchful, yes, but calm. And when she finally stood to leave, she whispered goodbye not just to her son, but to the fear that had held her for so long. This was not an ending, it never had been. A week later, the woods gave up something else. It was a forestry intern named Elias who found it, walking a routine maintenance loop just outside the official trail system. He wasn't searching for clues, just checking erosion barriers after a heavy spring rain. He nearly stepped on it before realizing what he was seeing. A plastic evidence flag, half buried in mud, torn from whatever investigation it once belonged to. Curious, he followed a shallow channel where the rain had washed away part of the embankment. Just ahead, tangled in exposed roots and old leaves, lay a torn journal. Waterlogged, its spine warped, but still holding together. The first few pages were smeared into pulp, the ink lost forever, but in the center, tucked deep in the fold where moisture hadn't yet destroyed the paper, there were words. Detective Hensley called Jennifer that same evening. He didn't read them to her over the phone. He just asked if she had time to come in. She was there within the hour, sitting once more in the small conference room she had come to know too well. He placed the evidence bag in front of her gently, as if it might fall apart under the weight of what it held. Inside, the journal lay open to a page dated 10 days after Noah's last known recording. The handwriting was unsteady but recognizable. Her son's. I stayed near the stones for 3 days. The knocking stopped. The cold didn't. Food's almost gone. I think I'm circling the same patch of trees. They look the same, but something's wrong with the light. It doesn't move like it should. Another page, scrawled over the back of a map scrap. If someone finds this, tell my mom I didn't give up. I kept filming. I kept trying. If they find the tripod, they'll know where I was. Don't follow the knocking. It's not a person. It only sounds like one. Jennifer stared at the words. Her fingers pressed gently against the plastic. Her heart ached, but something else stirred too. Pride. The quiet kind that comes from knowing your child faced something unspeakable and still chose to document, to leave breadcrumbs for the world behind him. Noah hadn't been lost. He had been leaving a trail. That night, Jennifer placed the journal pages on Noah's desk, smoothing them gently beside the worn map he had once annotated with red ink. The edges curled slightly where water had kissed the paper, and some of the words had blurred, but his voice was still there. Not just in ink, but in intention. She imagined him scribbling in the dim glow of a headlamp, surrounded by silence so thick it pressed on the ribs. Alone, cold, afraid, but still writing. She didn't sleep. Instead, she sat in his room with a blanket draped over her shoulders, the pages lit by the soft glow of his old desk lamp. The phrase circled her mind again and again. Don't follow the knocking. It had sounded like a warning at first, a desperate plea. But now she read it differently. It wasn't fear guiding his hand, it was care. A final act of protection. Even in those last days, when the woods seemed to fold in around him, he'd thought of her, of others, of how to keep them safe. She closed the journal and rested her hand over it. Her son had vanished without a trace, leaving behind a mystery tangled in branches and whispers. But he had never disappeared without purpose. That difference mattered. Later that week, the sheriff's office quietly updated the case file. Official cause of death, undetermined. Location, unrecovered. Status, closed, pending further discovery. There were no plans to reopen the investigation. Nothing more to search for. Not in any official capacity. But in the community, the story lived on. Local papers called it a haunting, others called it legend. Forums dissected the journal entries, speculated about hidden meanings. Some tried to retrace Noah's path using satellite images and historic maps. A few even hiked out to the stone circle themselves, though most returned quietly, choosing not to share what they felt there. Jennifer never joined them. She didn't need to. She had what mattered. His words, his voice, his warning. And on quiet nights, when the wind pushed through the trees just right, she didn't hear knocking. She heard her son's whisper on the leaves, still guiding, still watching, still trying to finish the story he started, frame by frame. Spring came slow that year. The trees were late to leaf, and the mountains held on to their frost longer than usual, as if the land itself was reluctant to wake. Jennifer didn't mind. She spent her mornings on the porch with a cup of tea, wrapped in one of Noah's old flannel blankets. The forest line in the distance remained the same, shadowed and quiet, but it no longer made her flinch when she looked toward it. One afternoon, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a small hard drive and a typed note. I used to run with a drone group online. We archive footage in case anyone wants it later. One of our guys passed last month. I think this was meant for you. No name, no signature, just the drive. She plugged it in, breath held, hands trembling. The files were dated 2 years prior. Most of it was drone footage, trees, rivers, wildlife. But buried deep in a folder labeled Red Pine 6 was a video she had never seen before. The drone moved steadily above the canopy, sweeping a ridgeline with soft, even curves. Nothing unusual at first. Then, as the camera dipped beneath the treetops, the outline of a figure appeared between the branches, just standing, still, watching the drone pass. Jennifer leaned forward. She knew it wasn't Noah. The shape was taller, broader, motionless, in a way that didn't feel human. There was no face, no movement, just presence. The drone circled once, then pulled away, losing it in the trees. She didn't send it to the police, didn't post it online. Instead, she added it to the archive she'd been building on Noah's old laptop, every clip, every photo, every word he'd left behind. Not to prove anything, not to chase what was already gone, but to preserve it. By the time the trees had turned green again, Jennifer had finished editing a short film, not for awards, not for release, just for Noah. She set it to his favorite instrumental track, the one he used to play when cutting his footage. It ended with the tripod standing alone in the forest, sun cutting through the trees, and the words he had written in the margin of his first storyboard. What matters is that someone sees it. The anniversary came quietly, without ceremony or announcement. Jennifer spent the morning in town, picking up groceries and making small talk with neighbors who had learned to stop asking how she was doing. Grief, she'd come to understand, didn't end, it just changed its shape. Some days it was a weight, other days a presence. But on this day, it was something softer, something she carried like a photograph folded neatly in her back pocket. That afternoon, she returned to the clearing. It took her longer now. The trail had grown denser, and the path was half swallowed by moss and thyme. But the forest still remembered. The circle of trees stood unchanged. The hollow where the tripod had once rested was filled in now, covered in leaves and wildflowers. She didn't disturb it. Instead, she sat at the edge of the clearing, letting the quiet settle around her. She opened the small canvas bag she'd brought with her. Inside was a new camera, one she had bought with the money left untouched in Noah's college fund. It wasn't for work or any kind of documentary. It was just for her, for the light through the trees, for the stillness of a place that had once only brought fear and now brought something closer to understanding. She set the tripod in the same spot where Noah's had once stood and mounted the camera. Then she stepped back, adjusted the angle, and hit record. For several minutes, she filmed nothing. Just the woods breathing, wind threading through the branches, light slipping between the gaps like a whispered truth. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. When she finally stopped the recording, she packed everything carefully, leaving behind only a small wooden token. On one side, she had carved Noah's initials. On the other, a single word, seen. As she made her way back toward the trail, she paused once, turning to look behind her. A breeze lifted her hair. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out. The forest held its silence, deep and wide. Jennifer smiled to herself. She didn't know what else the woods might reveal one day. But for now, she had heard what mattered. And more importantly, she knew someone else had too. Later that summer, Detective Hensley paid Jennifer an unannounced visit. She had just come in from watering the garden, sleeves rolled up and dirt under her nails, when she saw his car in the driveway. He stepped out holding a small evidence box, weathered at the corners, marked with a case number she knew by heart. She opened the door before he could knock. "I thought you might want this," he said gently. "It's being decommissioned, officially closed, no further investigation pending." Jennifer took the box in both hands. It felt heavier than it looked. Inside were the last recovered items from Noah's case. His cracked phone, drained and unusable but still intact. The journal pages preserved in new archival sleeves. A USB drive with the restored footage, neatly labeled. And beneath it all, carefully wrapped in cloth, the shattered lens from his camera, its glass fractured but glinting in the light, like a broken star. She looked up at Hensley, searching for some hidden meaning behind the visit. "We didn't find more," he said, answering before she could ask. "No remains, no new evidence. But I thought you should have these. He made sure we'd find them. That has to count for something." Jennifer nodded slowly. "It does." They sat on the porch for a while, saying little. The wind shifted across the field behind the house, stirring the tall grass. Hensley watched it like he was waiting for something to emerge, but the field remained empty. He stood to leave a short time later, offering a small wave before getting into his car. After he left, Jennifer brought the box into Noah's room. She cleared a space on his bookshelf, sliding aside the stacks of storyboards and film textbooks. One by one, she placed each item with quiet care. A kind of homecoming. When she picked up the lens again, She saw her own reflection fractured in its surface, 1,000 tiny shards of the same face, not broken, but changed, like something that had been through fire and come out the other side, still holding its shape. She placed it last, right at the center. Then she sat down in his chair, folded her hands, and whispered into the silence. "I'm still listening." Jennifer never expected the dreams to come back. At first, they were faint, flickers behind her eyelids just before waking, like unfinished scenes left on the cutting room floor. She would see trees swaying without wind, a figure in the distance that vanished whenever she turned her head, the echo of a voice that always stopped short of saying her name. She tried not to read into them. Grief plays tricks, she told herself. Memory fills in gaps where the truth went missing. But one night, weeks after the detective's visit, the dream changed. She was in the clearing again, the one where Noah's tripod had stood. Only this time, it wasn't empty. In the center, a light flickered softly dim, warm, like the glow of a lantern behind canvas. She stepped closer. The wind didn't move. The trees didn't creak. And there was no sound except her own breath. The tripod was there again, just as it had been in the drone footage. Mounted on it was a camera, working, recording. She knelt beside it and looked through the viewfinder. What she saw wasn't the forest. It was Noah, sitting in his tent, wrapped in a blanket, eyes tired but calm. He wasn't speaking. He was just looking into the lens, as if waiting for someone to notice. Then, after a long pause, he nodded small, slow, and the screen went dark. Jennifer woke with a start, breath caught in her throat, heart hammering in her chest. Morning light was beginning to break across the ceiling. She sat up, unsure of what she had just experienced. It hadn't felt like a memory. It hadn't felt like a dream either. She rose quietly, walked to Noah's room, and opened the door. The air inside was still, untouched. She sat at his desk, reached for the notebook she had begun filling with his quotes and story outlines, and turned to a fresh page. In the margin, she wrote, he wasn't just leaving a trail, he was leaving a signal. The dreams might fade, the answers might never fully come. But she knew now, deep in her bones, that somewhere, whether in memory, in film, or in whatever lay beyond the trees, he was still out there, waiting to be seen. A month later, Jennifer received an email from a stranger. The subject line was simple: tripod footage inquiry. The sender identified himself as Marcus Delano, a graduate student at UNC working on a thesis about Appalachian folklore and how regional myths intersect with disappearances. He had come across Noah's story during his research and was requesting permission to include pieces of Noah's recovered footage in his final project. Not to sensationalize, he promised, but to honor the original intent, to let Noah's voice carry further. Jennifer stared at the message for a long time before replying. She didn't hesitate because she doubted the student's sincerity. His tone was respectful, careful, almost reverent. She hesitated because it was the first time someone had asked to share Noah's work for what it truly was, a documentary, not a case, not a headline, but a story. One Noah had tried to tell, even as the forest closed in around him. She wrote back that evening. Yes, use what you need. Just don't clean it up too much. Let it stay rough. That's how he worked. That's how he wanted it seen. Marcus replied within the hour, grateful and eager to speak further. He asked about the trip Noah took, what he'd been researching, the legends he'd followed. Jennifer answered every question, pulling out Noah's notes and maps, the scribbled timelines, even the interview outlines he had drafted but never recorded. The more they spoke, the more she saw something familiar in Marcus, a deep, searching curiosity, the same drive that had once kept Noah awake into the early hours, stitching together theories on his bedroom wall. Later that week, Marcus sent her a sample cut of the short film he was building. It began with a close-up of Noah's journal, his handwriting sliding across the screen in silence. Then, in a slow fade, the camera turned toward the woods, not the footage from the drone, Not even from Noah's own recordings. It was new. Marcus had gone out there himself. But he didn't go far. He stopped at the clearing, right at the edge. Then he turned the camera back around and whispered, "I'm not here to follow, just to listen." And that's where the video ended. The library auditorium was small, with a projector balanced on a rolling cart and folding chairs lined up in rows that creaked when you sat in them. It wasn't glamorous, not the way film festivals usually looked on TV, but it was full. Locals, students, professors, and a handful of those who had helped search for Noah 3 years ago. Jennifer sat in the back this time, away from the spotlight, her hands folded quietly in her lap as Marcus Delano introduced his thesis film. He didn't speak for long. Just a few words about Appalachian folklore, the way stories echo through time, and how Noah Whitaker had started something brave without realizing how far it might carry. Then, the lights dimmed, and the screen filled with trees. The film was only 15 minutes long. It didn't try to explain Noah's disappearance. It didn't point fingers or speculate. Instead, it built a quiet map of memory. Fragments from his original footage played beside slow shots of the forest as it is now. Marcus's narration filled in the spaces Noah couldn't, drawing from his notes and journal entries with care. There was reverence in every frame, not for the mystery, but for the storyteller. Halfway through, the audience saw the tripod again. That same image from the drone, untouched and surrounded by green, it lingered on screen just long enough to feel like something breathing. Then, a shot of Noah's handwriting. Some stories don't want to be solved, they want to be understood. The closing sequence was silent. The woods bathed in late afternoon light, filtered through shifting leaves, and then, in the final frame, a small wooden token at the base of a tree, NW on one side. Scene on the other. When the lights came up, no one clapped right away. It was like everyone knew applause didn't belong there. They sat quietly instead, some blinking back tears, some just staring ahead like the film hadn't really ended. Marcus stood at the front but didn't speak. He just nodded once, as if to say, "You heard it too." Jennifer stayed seated long after the room emptied. For the first time, she wasn't wondering what had happened to Noah. She was simply proud of the way he'd been remembered. A few weeks after the screening, Jennifer received a letter in the mail with no return address. Not typed, not emailed, handwritten, sealed with a simple piece of tape, the envelope weathered around the edges like it had passed through more than one set of hands. Inside was a single page. "I saw your son once, not when he vanished. After. It was early winter, the year he went missing. I was hiking along a ridge I don't usually take. Snow on the ground, air so still it hurt to breathe. I saw someone in the trees below me, standing still, wrapped in a red flannel. He didn't wave, didn't call out, just looked up at me for a long time. I didn't go down. Something in my chest told me not to. For years, I convinced myself it was just a trick of the light, that I made it up. But after seeing the film, I think I owe you this truth. I don't need a reply. I just needed you to know he wasn't alone out there. Someone saw him." Jennifer read it twice. Then again, there was no name, no way to know where it had come from. But it didn't feel like a hoax. It didn't feel cruel. It felt quiet, honest. The kind of truth someone had carried for too long. She sat on her front porch for a long while, the letter folded gently in her hands. She thought of the ridge, the snow, the way Noah had always worn his red flannel on cold days. She tried to picture him looking up, not in fear, but as if to say, "I'm still here. I still exist in someone's memory." Later, she slipped the letter into the back of Noah's journal, behind the final entry. It wasn't confirmation, it wasn't closure, but it was something else. A single thread connecting the world that had moved on and the one still caught between trees. Somewhere out there, her son had been seen. Not filmed, not recorded, just seen. And maybe, in some ways, that mattered more than anything else. Maybe being remembered was the story he'd always meant to leave behind. Autumn returned with its usual hush, leaves crisping at the edges and falling in slow spirals across the lawn. The air had a bite again, and the forest at the edge of town turned the color of old fire. Jennifer found herself waking early, drawn to the porch before the sun rose. It had become a habit, one she didn't question. She would sit with a blanket over her knees, a mug of tea cradled in both hands, and just listen. For birdsong, for wind, for silence. That morning, a package arrived. It was small, square, and wrapped in brown paper. Tucked inside was a hardback book. The title was simple: Echoes Beyond the Pines, Appalachian Myth and the Vanished. The author listed was Marcus Delano. The dedication on the first page stopped her breath. To the boy who asked better questions than any adult ever dared? And to his mother, who never stopped listening? Jennifer traced the words with her fingertips, then turned the page. She wasn't sure what she expected: a clinical study, a thesis dressed up as a memoir. But what she found was something far more human. Each chapter wove together history, folklore, and the personal accounts Marcus had collected over his years of research. It didn't offer answers, it offered space for wonder. And threaded through the whole thing, like a quiet pulse, was Noah. Not as a case, not as a tragedy. As a voice, a filmmaker, a seeker. Marcus had included stills from Noah's footage, grainy, imperfect images full of movement and meaning. There were pages from his notebooks, printed exactly as he wrote them, question marks scrawled in the margins, arrows connecting one myth to another. Jennifer read each one slowly, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes, not from sadness, but from recognition. He had been seen, and now, through this, others would see him too. She closed the book, held it to her chest for a long moment, and then stood. In the hallway, outside Noah's room, she hung it on the wall where sunlight would catch its spine. There was still no ending, but there was this: the echo of a boy who looked into the woods and pressed record. By early November, the leaves had thinned, and the forest was once again bearing its bones. The trailheads emptied out, summer hikers long gone, and the wind took on that hollow, whispering quality that always seemed to come before snow. Jennifer drove out to the edge of the park one morning, not out of impulse but something quieter. She wasn't looking for answers, she just wanted to walk. The air smelled like cold pine and wet earth. She followed the path Noah once took, boots crunching over half-frozen ground. The sun was low, filtered through gray clouds that never fully lifted. Everything around her looked familiar, yet changed like a painting someone had gone back and traced over. She passed the clearing, just far enough to see its edge, then veered toward a bend in the trail where the old stones stood. They were smaller than she remembered, or maybe her memory had made them larger. They carried no markings, no names, just age, just presence. From her coat pocket, she pulled a small envelope. Inside it, folded and creased, was the letter from the anonymous hiker. She had read it so many times the paper felt thin in her hands. She knelt by one of the stones and placed the letter beneath it, weighing it down with care. She didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. Instead, she stood and pulled her phone from her other pocket. She opened the camera and turned it toward the trees, not to record. Not this time. Just to look. Through the lens, the forest seemed softer. Not less wild, but somehow less cruel. She captured a single photo. A wide frame of the trail, the clearing just barely in view, framed by bare branches and frost-slick moss. It wasn't dramatic. No hidden figures. No shadow in the background. Just the place as it was now. Later that evening, she uploaded it to the digital archive she kept for Noah's work. She titled the image simply, "Still Here." It felt right. The woods hadn't erased him. They hadn't hidden the truth completely. He had left his story behind, in frames and fragments. And now, at last, the story was telling itself back. The first snow came quietly, drifting down in soft spirals that coated the roofs and hillsides like a breath held too long. Jennifer stood at the kitchen window watching it gather in the corners of the yard, blanketing the flower beds she hadn't yet cleared. The world always seemed slower when it snowed, like time itself took a seat beside you and waited. She sipped her coffee and thought about Noah's first winter hike. He was 12, still too small for the oversized boots she had insisted he wear. He had packed his backpack like an explorer, even though they were only going half a mile up the trail. He carried a cheap camcorder in one hand and a peanut butter sandwich in the other. She remembered how he kept stopping to record bird tracks in the snow, narrating as if someone might be watching. Someone always had been. She walked into his room and turned on the desk lamp, the soft glow cutting through the gray light outside. The bookshelf had grown over the past year, filled with pieces of his legacy printouts of his footage, copies of Marcus's book, new articles citing Noah's story as a case study in folklore, grief, and media. Each one gave him a new kind of presence. But it was the newest item on the shelf that caught her eye. A small envelope, postmarked from Tennessee, had arrived the day before. Inside was a postcard from an independent documentary collective. The image showed a frame from Noah's footage, the tripod silhouetted against the tree line, and the text on the back read, "Your son's story changed the way we think about the unknown. Thank you for letting us see it." Jennifer placed the card in front of the lamp, where it caught the light. Outside, the snow kept falling. She didn't cry. She didn't feel hollow either. What she felt was steadier. Not peace exactly, but something close, like a camera locking into focus after a long drift. The pain hadn't vanished, but it had somewhere to go now. It had purpose. She pressed her hand to the window pane and watched the white world blur. He was everywhere now. Not lost, not forgotten. Seen. Winter settled in fully by December, blanketing the hills with silence and slowing the world to a thoughtful crawl. Jennifer found herself embracing the rhythm. Mornings came with long walks through frost-lined streets, her breath rising in slow spirals. Evenings meant quiet music and small rituals, lighting a candle by Noah's bookshelf, updating his archive, sorting through emails from people she'd never met who now knew her son's name. One message stood out. It came from a woman named Helen, an archivist in West Virginia, who had spent the past year compiling oral histories from families with lost relatives in the Appalachian region. She had seen Marcus's film, read the book, and now reached out with a strange and careful proposition. "There's a story here," she wrote, "not just about Noah, about the place, about the others who vanished and the ones who saw something and never spoke. I think he tapped into something much older than we understand. Would you ever consider working with me to document it further?" Jennifer stared at the email, heart quiet but alert. For a long time, she had imagined the story as finished, closed with the recovered tripod, the film, the book, the silence that followed. But now she saw it for what it was, a starting point. Noah hadn't tried to solve a mystery, he'd tried to open a door. She had the keys now. Later that evening, she wrote back, "Yes, I'd like that." She closed her laptop and walked to the window. Snow was falling again, slower this time, the kind that softened everything it touched. The woods in the distance were hidden beneath its hush, but she could still feel them, still sense the weight of memory tucked among the trees. She turned back toward Noah's room and stepped inside. His camera cleaned, restored, unused, since it had been recovered, sat on the shelf like a question. She picked it up. It still held warmth from the lamplight. She didn't need to film what came next. Not yet. But she would go back. Not to search. Not to mourn. To listen again, and this time to respond. Because some echoes weren't meant to fade, they were meant to be followed, frame by frame. Jennifer met Helen in person on a gray morning in late January. They chose a small cafe near the base of the Blue Ridge foothills, a place with cracked vinyl booths and windows that fogged over from the steam of coffee cups. It wasn't formal, but that felt right. This wasn't an interview, it was something quieter. A passing of threads between two women who had spent years walking parallel paths through grief, memory, and silence. Helen was older, maybe in her 60s, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a braid and hands that moved with purpose. She didn't come with a laptop or a list of questions. Instead, she brought a stack of notebooks and a box of cassette tapes labeled with dates and initials, oral histories, dozens of them. Jennifer listened as Helen spoke of families in the region, some whose loved ones had vanished without explanation, others who swore they saw things in the woods they never dared repeat. "They all think they're alone," Helen said softly, sipping her tea. "But they're not. These stories, they echo. Yours just happens to be the one that finally got heard." Jennifer nodded, her throat tight. He never wanted to solve anything, he just wanted people to look. They spent hours talking, trading stories and ideas. By the end of the afternoon, they had the outline of something part documentary, part archive, part living record of the unexplained. A project that wouldn't seek to explain what couldn't be explained, but instead preserve the voices of those who had seen and endured and kept it to themselves. Jennifer didn't yet know what her role would be in this, only that she felt pulled toward it, like a current, slow and steady, moving beneath everything. As they left the cafe, the snow had started again. Helen turned and said, "I think your son opened a door, and now it's our job to keep it open, gently." Jennifer smiled, her breath clouding in the air. That night, back home, she pulled out Noah's journal again. The margin notes, the theories, the names scribbled sideways. She didn't feel haunted anymore. She felt ready, not to follow, but to walk beside the echoes. This time, not as a mother grieving, but as a storyteller too. In early February, Jennifer returned to the woods. Not to the clearing, not yet. That place still held its own rhythm, and she wasn't ready to disturb it. Instead, she started with the outer trails, the ones Noah had mapped in his notebooks but hadn't fully explored. She carried a field recorder and a leather-bound journal tucked into her coat, the same kind Noah had once used. The pages were blank. For now. She walked slow, letting the forest speak. Wind whispered through the branches, creaking limbs overhead and the soft hush of melting snow underfoot. There was something meditative in the stillness, as if the trees themselves remembered her. Not as a trespasser, but as someone who had earned the right to return. She paused at an old wooden signpost, half collapsed under the weight of time. The name carved into the board had been worn smooth, but Noah had mentioned it once in his notes. "Red Hollow Overlook," he had written, followed by a question mark and 3 stars. She didn't know what the stars meant, beauty, maybe, or mystery, possibly both. She climbed the narrow path beyond it, winding between rocks slick with ice, and found herself standing at the edge of a ridge. From there, the land stretched wide beneath her, folding into the soft blue layers of hills that went on and on until they met the sky. It was quiet, achingly so. Jennifer reached into her coat and pressed record. She didn't speak at first, just let the wind do the talking. A bird called somewhere to her left. A distant creak of old wood echoed from deeper within, all of it real, all of it unchanged. Then she said gently, "You were right, Noah. There's something here." She closed her eyes and held the recorder close to her chest. Not as proof, not as evidence, just as acknowledgement. She wasn't trying to solve anything, she was listening, and that was enough. As she hiked back down, the recorder still running, she didn't feel like she was walking out of the woods. She felt like she was walking further in, toward something unfinished, something waiting. Something still unfolding, one step at a time. Spring returned with little warning. The ice cracked and disappeared almost overnight, and the air took on a softness Jennifer hadn't felt in years. On one particularly warm afternoon, she sat on the porch with the windows open, sorting through the newest batch of recordings. Not just her own, but ones Helen had mailed old interviews, audio letters, whispered stories passed from one generation to the next. It had become their rhythm now, this quiet collaboration. A growing archive of voices. One tape stopped her. The voice on it was young, male, steady but nervous. The boy was recounting a story from his grandfather, something about a light in the woods that never moved, a shape that stood behind trees but never cast a shadow. He said it scared him, but he kept watching because it felt like the thing wanted to be seen, not feared, not chased, just seen. Jennifer listened twice. The second time, she wept. Later that evening, she uploaded the file to the archive. Beneath it, she typed a single note, another echo. She didn't believe in coincidences anymore. Not after everything. Not after Noah. The house no longer felt like a place frozen in time. His room, once untouched, had evolved into something living. His desk held new notebooks beside the old ones. The walls bore photographs, some his, some hers, some from others who had begun reaching out. A map of the region stretched across the far wall, dotted with pins and string, not to solve a mystery, but to mark where stories had been told. It wasn't an investigation now. It was a continuation. One morning, she hiked back to the original clearing. The grass had grown thick there, almost golden in the spring sun. The indentation where the tripod once stood had nearly vanished, but Jennifer knelt and placed a small carved plaque into the ground. Nothing ornate, just words burned carefully into the wood. He saw what others didn't. He stayed until he was seen. She stepped back, sunlight warming her face. There was no final frame, no end credits. Only the soft hum of a recorder turning on again. And the story continuing, forever unfolding.